I think we have the vast majority of attendees here, so thank you all for zooming in. My name is Ian Taylor. I'm a partner at Pear VC. We work with founders on their product and growth from day zero of building a company, and we seek to partner with those founders all the way to IPO. We've been fortunate to partner early with founders at DoorDash, Branch, Gusto, Guardant Health, and many other world-changing companies. In addition to being a seed fund, we also host an accelerator twice per year. Our team works hands-on with a small number of startups over 3 months. The application's deadline to that Pear Summer Accelerator is May 25th, and you can find the application form on pear.vc/accelerator. We also have a series of speakers over the next months. The next talk will be about accessing non-dilutive government funding, and it will take place on May 6th. You can RSVP for future talks at pear.vc/speakers. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Matthew Prince to this online speaker series. Matthew Prince is the CEO and co-founder of CloudFlare, the web performance and security company. His company has become an integral part of the internet's infrastructure. Matthew co-founded CloudFlare with Michelle Zatlyn and Lee Holloway while he was studying at Harvard Business School in 2009. And a decade later, he led the company through its IPO last year. Thank you for joining us, Matthew.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Could you please start by explaining to us what CloudFlare does so the audience has context?
Sure. So at CloudFlare, our mission is to help build a better internet. And what we mean by that is that the internet was never really designed for what it's become. When in the 1960s, the original specifications for the ARPANET, and which became the internet, were laid down, no one foresaw that we were going to be doing Zoom calls, that we were all going to be relying on it to get work done, to do banking, commerce, everything that we're all literally living through, how essential the internet has become in our life. And so a lot of the thoughts around security, performance, reliability were never really built into the original internet infrastructure. And so for the last 10 years, what we've been doing is essentially layering that layer of protection, reliability, performance on top of the internet. And we really have sort of two different halves of our business. One half is to say, if you're putting anything, exposing it to the internet as a whole. So if you're publishing a website, putting up an API, making a mobile app that has some sort of a back end to it, then CloudFlare can help make sure that that is secure from any security threats, reliable, will stay online no matter what, and incredibly performant, will be fast no matter where you are on Earth. And to do that, we run a massive global network. We're in about 200 cities worldwide in over 90 countries, and we operate the equipment that's there. And so if you were going to one of our customers' websites and you were sitting in Sydney, Australia, you'd hit our data center in Sydney, Australia. We do a bunch of analysis on whether you're a good guy or a bad guy there. If you're a good guy, we put you on a sort of a fast lane back to wherever our customer's infrastructure was. If you're a bad guy, we'd stop you out of that edge. So that's one half of our business. The other half of our business, which has become really relevant over the course of the last 2 months, has been that we help protect companies' internal applications and employees when they're going about their business. And so we take all the functionality that you used to buy from a hardware firewall or a VPN, and we turn that into a service. And that's something that has been extremely important. We actually made the decision about 6 weeks ago to make that service available for free to any companies through September, because what we were seeing was, as everyone went to work from home, the existing hardware firewalls and VPNs were falling over. They just literally didn't have enough capacity. And so our cloud-based solution was a part of that. And we get to use that same network in over 100 or 200 cities worldwide that provides that same infrastructure. And so that's what we're doing. We have about 1,200 employees, 13 offices around the world. Today, obviously, we have about 1,200 offices because almost everyone is working from home. And yeah, it's been a really incredible journey, and I think our entire team is proud to play our role in some level as being some of the guardians of the internet.
Fantastic, thank you. A very, very impressive story. CloudFlare was born in 2009 during another economic crisis, the Great Recession. Can you share any advice that you've learned from that period to founders who are starting their company now during economic uncertainty again?
I think, what's pretty interesting in retrospect is to look back and see how many great companies were really born out of that time. If I just look at my class, my business school class, there were 4 companies that went on to be worth more than $1 billion in the 9 or 10 years since we graduated. Rent the Runway with Jen and Jenny, ThreadUp with Chris and James. Surprisingly, maybe the most successful of all was Tough Mudder, the mud race, which is wildly successful, started by a guy named Will Dean, and then us. And so the question is why is that? And I think it's 2 things. The first is if the economy had been roaring and everything had been going really well, I'm not sure that Michelle and I would have ever taken the risk to start a business. At some level, adversity makes you start to think about other paths that you can take. In Michelle's case, she had been a summer intern at Google between her first and second year of business school, and and she did really, really well, and everyone liked her. And she got to the end of the summer, and if you do really well in your Google internship, you expect to get an offer to come work at Google. And Google said, this is the 1 year that we're not going to do any offers to any of our summer interns. And so she came back and she had to kind of figure something else out. And I think that had she had kind of that easy defined path ahead of her, I think it would have been more difficult for me to convince her to, come, hey, let's, try and start this crazy company, which is obviously worked out, really well for her and for us. I think the other piece is that at some level, your job as the founder of a company is to not run out of money. And there are lots of ways to not run out of money. You can generate tons of revenue. You can raise a whole bunch of money. But one of the best is just not to spend a lot and to be really frugal with the resources you have. And I think being born out of a time of crisis made us really be incredibly cognizant of every dollar that we were spending. And I think as a result of that, we've always had a very frugal attitude. And I think that when I look out and see the other companies that I really admire that have really thrived, that they're the ones that have really thought through how I can be as efficient with the capital that I have as possible, and how I can always be a good steward of the capital that I'm entrusted with. And so I think those are the 2 things. I think that on one hand, if you're starting right now where we're in, what is an incredible global crisis, that gives a lot of very talented people that might have thought, oh, I'll go work at an investment bank, or I'll go, go work at a big tech company. That gives them sort of the excuse to go out and think about other opportunities. And then the second is that if you're fortunate enough to be able to start something and raise enough capital to get off the ground, I think that the frugality that these times teach you really does make for better companies, and I think that's very much was the experience that we lived through.
Yeah, when you evaluated the risk associated with economic uncertainty and the recession relative to the many risks associated with starting a business, how did you kind of weigh them up? Where did it come in the hierarchy? Was it high or low?
I mean, both my parents were entrepreneurs. I really didn't know how to apply for a job anywhere else. So like I was gonna go do this. Again, I might not have done this particular opportunity, but I was gonna do something kind of entrepreneurial, no matter what. And I think that, we were. I think that what I would say is that because it was a challenging time, it caused us to be to not worry about silly things. So I mean, we basically talked to we spent a bunch of time thinking about the business and really planning it and doing the hard work behind it and building our initial prototype. And you hear stories about people who run up and down Silicon Valley, up and down Sand Hill Road and talk to every VC and try and hyper optimize their term sheets. And we basically pitched one venture capitalist, and we pitched the person who we thought was the right initial investor. We had a relationship with another VC firm as well that didn't typically do early stage deals, but like we didn't go around, we didn't optimize. We sort of said, yeah, okay, you'll give us a couple $1 million, which seemed like a huge amount of money at the time, and we did basically the deal on a handshake. And I think, in retrospect, like we could own a lot more of the company probably. I mean, the biggest slug of equity we gave up was in that first round, but it just so doesn't matter, if these things are successful. And I don't begrudge, anyone who invested in us over those years, how it turned out. We were the only tech company in 2009 to raise money from Venrock, which was our initial investor, which is one of these like legendary investment firms. But again, I think that was just the sort of the situation at the time, and I think it caused us not to sweat the details on a lot of the other things, and pick who the right partner was, get back to focusing on the business and push forward. So it was, I think that it wasn't sort of the focus around that. I think the place that was harder, and it's always hard, but I think it's the place that's going to be hardest for entrepreneurs that have to start businesses during hard times is recruiting. It's really tough. The hardest thing you do as an entrepreneur, especially if nobody's ever heard of you before, is how do you hire, not your co-founders, but your first non-founder employee, and then your second, and then your third, and then your 10th, and then your 20th, and then your 50th. And that's incredibly difficult. And it's difficult during good times when people are more willing to take on risk. When times get tougher, it just gets a lot harder to pull people out of the Googles and the Facebooks and the other places where you might typically be able to attract talent. And so I think that's the place that's probably harder during tough economic times. But in a lot of the other things, it actually, I think a lot of it, really teaches you discipline, and that probably serves you really well in the end.
Fantastic, thank you. Speaking about talents and teams, I often think about what's the ideal fit for a founding team. So both in terms of personalities and skill sets. So Michelle was one of many HBS classmates, and Lee was many engineers you work with. How did you decide these were the two people that you wanted to build a company with?
Yeah, so I'd started a company before where I did it all completely wrong. And so let me tell you how I picked those co-founders, and then I'll tell you what was different about Lee and Michelle. So my first company was a company called, that I was a founding CEO of, was a company called Unspam Technologies, and we were doing an anti-spam product. And the three of us that co-founded the company basically chose to co-found the company because we had been friends since junior high, and we were friends in junior high because we had lockers next to each other. That is about the worst possible way you can choose who your co-founders are. Maybe your spouse, actually probably your significant other that you're not married to would probably be the absolute worst way. But your three buddies from junior high is pretty terrible. And what was hard about it was they're all great people. They've all been very successful subsequently. But the three of us together, the challenge was we had a ton of overlap, and we didn't have a lot of diversity in what our skill set were. We were all kind of a bunch of sort of technical, but not really technical, kind of wonky nerds. So we all had that kind of background. And the reason that that's tough is if there aren't natural divisions that make it clear whose job is what, then when you get to hard decisions, you end up spending all your time just fighting over what the right answer is, and you don't actually get anything done. And if you then resort to sort of hierarchy where I say, well, I'm the CEO, therefore this goes, that doesn't make the other people feel really good, because they could have just drawn different straws and been reordered in different ways. And so we fought like dogs. And one of the co-founders at Unspam and I didn't speak for several years, and we're actually really pretty close friends again now. But it was rough, and I think that fundamental to why it was rough was because we had so much overlap. And one of the kind of litmus tests, Michelle and I are fortunate enough now that a lot of entrepreneurs come to us for advice. And one of the questions that we get all the time is, gosh, how did you guys split up responsibility? And I try not to say this when someone asks it, but immediately my thought is, you have the wrong co-founder. Because if it's not 100% clear from day one, it's only going to get harder every day that passes. And so I think what was unique about us was everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And so I'm like the vision, marketing, sales guy who's got a little bit of sort of technical skills. So that was sort of my role. What I am terrible at is the just order and process and, actually getting things over the line. And so when I met Michelle, Michelle is, if I'm sort of she's actually more extroverted, but she's much less self-promotional than I am. So Michelle has ego and sort of the Freudian sense of ego, but she doesn't have vanity. Whereas she has a sense of right and wrong, but she has no need to get credit for any of the work which is being done, which is, it's just a remarkable and almost difficult for me to conceive of human being. But it's like a perfect match for me. She was literally a Six Sigma black belt at Toshiba. I can't even imagine what that is, but it turns out process matters, and having all those things and discipline and how you think about hiring and all that stuff really matters. Vision also really matters. And so that was kind of my job. Hers was process. And then Lee was just this technical genius. And, I remember early on, one of the things that really mattered to Michelle was she was like, I want to be on the board. And so I went to Lee and I was like, do you want to be on the board? And he's like, why on earth would I want to be on the board? I just want to write code. And so that was, the three of us together became this really, I think, strong foundational group. And the way that Michelle would describe it is, she said, if you're starting a company, there's this huge surface area that you've got to build a team to cover. And so with your founding team, you want a little bit of overlap between the various people, but just enough that you guys can communicate and have some sort of shared vision and shared kind of experience together. But at the end of the day, you want it to be like a Venn diagram where there's just enough overlap that you guys can communicate, but mostly you're just trying to cover as much surface area as possible. And so I think that was, that worked incredibly well for us. I've been amazed as I've talked to other founders who've been really successful. And oftentimes, if you look at Salesforce and you've got, Mark Benioff, who's this giant personality, and then you've got Parker Harris, who's the kind of get things done, cultural, behind the scenes guy. The Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. I mean, they're just very different cultural fits. The Sheryl Sandbergs and Mark Zuckerbergs, even though they weren't founders together, they're bringing different aspects to that relationship. I think that ends up being a really good formula for finding your co-founders.
Very interesting. Do you think in the same way when you think about all your employees? So this breadth of capabilities, but a central overlap in that Venn diagram. Is there anything that's kind of like core to all your employees, or you characteristics you look for?
I think that all of the sort of organizational behavior research shows that the more diverse your team is, the more likely you are to come up with the unique solution to a problem. And so, we have tried really hard to not, I walk into some companies and it's like, we hire the entire MIT, graduating class from, class 16 or whatever it is. And it's like, I'm sure I'd like one of those people, but the entire group together, it's less likely for them to have unique perspectives and unique points of view. So we try not to have kind of a funnel or perspective or anything else. And I think that, sometimes, like we'll have sometimes people who will push back and say, well, why should we be hiring such a diverse, set of people? And it literally is because that's the best way to find what the right answer is. And so you want people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different cultures to come in. What we tend to look for, if we're going to pick, characteristics, the two characteristics we try to hire for are curiosity. We like people who are just relentlessly curious, want to learn new things, want to take on new challenges, are just, sponges for information. And then empathy, which is a word that people throw around a lot. What I mean by it is the ability to be a good listener, the ability to change your mind when you hear facts that are different from what you assumed, to put yourself in someone else's shoes is the cliche, or see things from different perspectives. If you can find people who are curious and empathetic, they not only can they learn anything, they will learn everything that they need. And they're also just a lot more fun to be around. So we love, massive diversity on every different dimension that we can think of, curious, empathetic individuals. And that's been the formula for our success.
I'm sure lots of founders are jotting this down right now. They're writing out their hiring playbook based on this. Thank you.
Hiring's so hard. I mean, and it's really, and it's not fun. Like you are, especially at first, you are begging people to come work for you. And it's really scary. I remember being, terrified early on of telling people what we were going to pay, like what their salary was going to be, or asking them, what they needed in terms of equity, because it's very exposing. And so I think there's a temptation always to try to outsource hiring and try and put it in sort of the job of HR or something else. And I think it's the one thing that you really can't outsource. There's a friend of mine is a founder of another company, and she says that, the one job of the founder CEO is to fire yourself from every other job. And I've always really liked that. And I think that's true, with the one exception that hiring is something that has to be part of what you do. And so we have a whole recruiting team now, and they help facilitate. But at the end of the day, every single employee at CloudFlare is involved in the hiring process. We expect that every manager is going to spend between 10 and 20% of their time. So one day a week out of the work week actually spent on hiring and recruiting. I spend probably about a third of my time still on hiring and recruiting. And I think companies are just collections of the people who join them. And so there's almost nothing that you can do that's more important than just making sure you're getting really, really, really high quality people. And I think it's the one job that, as much as painful as it is, as much as there are days where I wake up and I'm like, oh, got to do another interview call. It is by far the most rewarding thing you can do, both in terms of what helps you define success, and then at the end of the day, just how incredibly flattering it is that somebody would choose to spend a good chunk of their career betting on and following your vision.
Do you have any advice for founding teams that might be trying to hire their first few hires, and maybe those first few hires don't have total confidence in that team yet? So it's very early, it's not totally clear how it's going to pan out, there's lots of risk.
Yeah, so it's really hard. And I remember, I remember begging people to just, please give us a shot. And people are like, yeah, no, don't quite see it, right? Because there's so many opportunities, and at some level, it's not completely irrational to start a company. It might be borderline irrational to be one of the very first employees of a company. The returns, not only financial, but just in terms of how quickly you can learn as a founder, are so much faster than even as a rank and file employee in those early days. And on almost every metric, someone is going to be better off taking a job at a CloudFlare or a Google or a Facebook than they are starting at the average company. So the question is, what can you do that that sort of gives you, an unfair advantage? And so, in our case, if I walk through the first handful of hires that we had, one, I was literally just scrolling through LinkedIn. We needed someone who was like a low level C and assembly programmer. And I found this guy, and it was clear he had this incredible resume for doing exactly that. And we looked at, what he was doing now, and he was doing kind of front end HTML, like as a web designer. And I wrote to him and I was like, you seem like you're kind of underemployed. And he said, well, I really wanted to be in the United States. I'm a French citizen. This was the only firm that would sponsor my visa. And so I took the job. And so I said, well, what if we transfer your visa to us and you can come here and write C and assembly? And he said, done. And so then we had to go figure out all about visas, and then sort of understanding how to recruit people and get visas. And we had a really great immigration attorney who's still our immigration attorney to this day. That became one of our superpowers, where when we were going out and looking for people, we would look for people that were sort of underemployed, but they were on some sort of visa, and we would be able to, transfer them in. And so I think trying to figure out what the unique advantage that you have is, and it's not, you can say, we're going to all make a ton of money, but that's what every startup says. Or you can figure out ways to get people to, really have either sort of a span of control of things that they really love to do. You can figure out how to have them have a mission and a purpose, which really resonates. It took us a while to figure out that Cloudflare's mission was to help build a better internet. But once we did, people were like, yes, that's why I work here. I like coming in and solving the hardest problems on internet level scale. And so I think that trying to figure out what that advantage is, and just being really clear about it is important. And, especially early stage employees, they can tell the difference between whether you're really true to whatever that mission is, and whether it's really part of what the company stands for, or whether it's something you're kind of just making up to recruit people. And so, we tried to be just relentlessly fair to those first employees, and it was fun. We had the 8 employees that got us to launch. Of them, a handful are still with us. About half are still with us, but the other half, most of them have gone on to start other companies, which is awesome. But we had them when we went public back in September. We had all of them out to join us on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. It's pretty amazing that we wouldn't have gotten to where we were without them. So it was great to be able to celebrate there with them.
I could imagine. So you've explained how hard hiring is right at the start of an entrepreneur's journey. The other hard thing, it seems to be also getting customers. Do you have any advice to share on trying to convince customers for pilots during a downturn, maybe when risk appetite and budgets might be constrained?
I don't know, this is good advice, but it was, for us, the key was, first of all, how did we compete with non-consumption? So, we started out by saying, we're going to take a service that, would cost you $100,000 a year and is only available to, the top 10,000 internet properties. And we're going to make it available and easy to use for everyone else. And then secondly, we're going to make it free, which again that's not a good strategy if there's not, and then, right. But that was the goal. We had a chicken and egg problem, which was, we knew that in order to provide the level of security and performance that we wanted, we had to get traffic, but we couldn't go sign up, big customers that would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars a year with us day one, because we didn't have the traffic to provide the services that we needed. So we had this sort of chicken and egg problem. And so the way that we made it work was, we said, we'll raise money from venture capitalists who will help us finance the kind of build out. We'll give the service away for the low end, that'll give us the data, will give us the network that we need in order to then start to sell and then move up market over time. So I think, anytime, I at business school, Clay Christensen, who just passed away this last January, was one of my professors. And, I had, right as we were starting CloudFlare, I had just, gone through his class and read The Innovator's Dilemma and thought about how that worked. I mean, I think that there is a tried and true formula to look for spaces that are complicated and expensive and therefore only service sort of the top end of a market, and say, how can I make that simple and inexpensive and go after the low end of the market? And what tends to happen is then the incumbents say, oh, that's just a toy. And so for a long time, Cloudflare's competitors would write us off, in fact, many still do, as that's just a toy for, small internet properties, for small businesses, for people that don't really need the, what the serious thing is. But the nature of technology is that you are able to improve your technology faster than consumers are able to kind of increase their technological needs. And what that then means is whoever that low-end disruptor is that comes into the market, that's often a very effective way to take on things. So I mean, that's so kind of sketched into my DNA. Having taken Clay's classes, and Clay's research assistant is now runs our strategy team, and his desk is across from mine. And so, I mean, that if I were to go start something else, I mean, I would follow that exact same model. Look for what's kind of expensive and difficult and only serves the top of the market, and then make it less expensive and easier and expand the market. And over time, that's just a tried and true formula for disrupting industries.
Thank you for sharing. When I was reading about your background, I was really struck by your ability to achieve multiple impressive feats simultaneously. I'm sure you're far too humble to say it yourself, but when you founded your first companies, you were also a law professor and a ski instructor. When you founded CloudFlare, you were also a Baker Scholar at HBS. And now you lead a very complex business that you have to consider technology, governments, corporations, law, and consumers. How do you go about allocating your attention, and how do you even decide how to allocate your attention?
Well, my educational career, where I went from, I thought I was going to college to study computer science, and then somehow ended up studying English literature, and then was recruited to go work at a bunch of technology firms, and blew that off to go to law school. And then, after law school, a bunch of people were trying to start companies, or during law school, a bunch of people were trying to start companies. I said, no, I'm just gonna be a securities lawyer. And then the internet bubble burst. And so I was scrounging around for something to do. And so I ended up teaching for a while. But, I think that, I mean, my career was kind of a mess up until 10 years ago. My parents were on my back to be like, and so it's nice of you to say, in retrospect, it all looks really impressive. My parents were like, when are you going to get a real job, right? And you went to law school. When are you just going to go practice law, or do something which is actually can make you gainfully employed? And I had to borrow money from my mom to pay my taxes in 2009 when we were first starting CloudFlare. If we hadn't raised money in November of that year, I don't know how I would have made rent. And so I mean, this has been a very circuitous path to get here. What I would say is, though, I feel very fortunate to have lived through that for two reasons. One, it was great that I minored in computer science, because not that I'm writing code at CloudFlare anymore. Our engineers wouldn't let me anywhere near our Git repositories, but I at least understand technology well enough to understand what's really possible and approximately how long it will take, and what is impossible, which is a really important thing that I think few executives have. for better or worse, if you end up sitting in front of, and we're in front of about, over 10% of the internet's, websites and other things, you end up having a lot of really complicated legal and public policy issues. And so having a little bit of an education in that has been incredibly useful. Business education, when I started my first startup, I was faking my way through being able to read a P&L or a balance sheet or anything else. Being able to now do that with confidence is really useful. I don't know that you have to spend 2 years going to business school to get that, but it was useful for me. And then actually, all the degrees that I had, my English degree, you think about what you have to do as the leader of a company when you get to have 1,200 plus employees. My job is to figure out how to clearly and concisely communicate over and over and over again. And so being able to be a good and a fast writer, a relatively comfortable public speaker, that all kind of comes back to that. I think the other thing which has been really, I feel very fortunate, is that throughout all of that, I've got to assemble kind of my network of really interesting people. So, if you look at, the person who led, our first round of financing was somebody that I had known from, my early days in high school. I've stayed in touch with some of the people that I went to college with who've been really helpful. Like a lot of our legal and public policy and corporate development and business development team came out of the people that I met when I was in law school. Same thing, Michelle, obviously from business school, and a handful of other people. And so, whether you're doing that through school or you're doing that through the jobs that you work at, I think that being a good colleague to the people that you get to know along the way, that ends up being the Rolodex that you can use to help build your company. And it's one of the reasons why, while we see some examples of incredibly successful, very young founders that are out there, a lot of times when I was 35 when we started CloudFlare, and I certainly had a lot more gray hair as a result of that, but I also had a set of colleagues that I could kind of bring together, and that's been super helpful as we constructed the company.
Fantastic, thank you. How has your daily routine changed over the past couple of months now that we're in this time of crisis?
Well, you inherently spending a lot more time, obviously, on Zoom calls. But I think the thing that surprised me is actually how little it's changed. I think everyone is experiencing this crisis in different ways. And what's been interesting is as you look across our team, different people and in different characteristics kind of had the most stressful times at different points along the way. So early on, in the first couple of weeks, it was parents with really young kids, preschool aged kids that had sort of the most stress. And that lasted for like 2 weeks. And then they kind of, again, everyone's circumstances are different and people are going up and down a lot more. But a lot of them kind of figured out a routine and they got that, it felt like kind of dialed in. And then it really started to hit parents with kids that were in sort of a school age time where they were having to figure out, how am I going to keep my kids entertained if they don't, maybe the first week of doing online lessons was okay, but then it got a lot harder. I think in the last couple of weeks, it's been really the people who are single and living on their own, where they're starting to go, we can feel they're starting to go stir crazy and just longing to have, some other human connection beyond just a video screen. I feel incredibly fortunate. I grew up in Park City, Utah, and my dad, who's in his late 70s, is out here, and my wife and I have a home here. And so about 6 weeks ago, we flew out to be close to him. We don't have kids, and we've got enough, and we're both we're both working on, she's working on an early stage startup, and you know, I'm doing what I'm doing, but I feel like I feel incredibly fortunate that I can still do the vast majority of my job, which is communicate with the team. And I can do most of that, you know, virtually. I think there are some things that I've been, you know, pleasantly surprised that have actually been better. I am, for the first time in a long time, much better at sitting down and writing than I've been in a long time. I think that's been really positive for me, and has been about a bunch of what we're doing. But my day still is I spend about a third of my time on recruiting, about a third of my time on what I'll call sort of internal relations, which is, you know, set the strategy, set the vision, help settle conflicts, be chief coin flipper. And then about a third of my time on external relations, which is, you know, we're a public company, so that's talking to, you know, financial analysts, talking to industry analysts, talking to customers, you know, meeting with the media, doing things like this. But if you looked at it kind of pre-crisis or post-crisis, that split of time is about exactly the same.
Okay.
The only difference is, you know, I'm doing it on a screen as opposed to doing it in person.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm spending a lot less time on airplanes. I miss that, actually.
Do you have a pragmatic advice for how you're maintaining morale in your team, and even through the difficult times over the years with CloudFlare?
You know, I think so in this particular circumstance, we're trying to do a couple of things. The first is we're trying to understand that every individual in every city where we have an office, their experience is changing and is different and unique on an almost day-to-day basis. And so, you know, we have offices in 13 cities around the world. They will not all open on the same day. And some of them, it's going to be a long time before they open. Some of them are probably going to open in the next little bit. But, you know, one of the things that we've tried to say is, even if we open the office, that doesn't mean you have to necessarily come back. And our expectation is that we're going to be in a work from wherever you feel most comfortable posture, at least until the fall. And I think, you know, communicating, there's so much anxiety, communicating that has been one of the sort of just, you know, once you feel like, oh, if I have kids at home and there's not school going on, I know that the company is going to support me and support my ability to continue to take care of my kids, even when the offices open back up, and that they have empathy for that. On the other hand, if someone is doing absolutely stir crazy and they're like, I just need to see another human being, and that's about 20% of our team right now. Then being like, listen, the minute we can safely open a space for you to come back, we'll have, you know, social distancing and we'll have, you know, the proper protective measures and everything else. But we understand that there's a bit of work for you, which was your social life, and that's been missing, and that's getting harder and harder with every day that goes on. And that answer is going to change on a person by person, region by region, day by day basis. And I think communicating that flexibility, that's foundational. And that's sort of where we started. I think after that, you know, one of the things that, you know, I think a lot of people are struggling with is most of the world feels incredibly powerless against this virus, which is out there. It's like being, I hated the Lord of the Rings movies, but it's like being in a bad Lord of the Rings movie where there's this sort of great, undefeatable, unknowable evil that's out there. And that's kind of what I think a lot of the world feels like they're going through. I think what's made it easier for me to get out of bed is obviously the superheroes of this crisis are going to be the you know, medical professionals and scientists who are taking care of the sick and looking for a cure. But sort of the reliable sidekick is going to be the internet. And, you know, thank God this happened today and not 10 years ago, because we would be even in worse shape than we are right now. And I think our entire team wakes up every day and says, you know, what are we going to do today? You know, we're going to take care of the internet. We're going to make sure it continues to work. And I think that has given our team a real sense of purpose, which has been really positive. And so then, as you think about what culture is shared experiences together. And so then we're trying to do a bunch of things that create those shared experiences. So how can we do fireside chats where you get to know our, CFO and what his, favorite movies are in kind of a lighthearted and sort of fun way. We've brought in a whole bunch of, really amazing guest speakers who have come and shared what it's been like in their careers going through what are real crises. And then, we're doing all kinds of, hokey things like, we're doing CloudFlare cooking challenges where a bunch of people, 25 people will get together and try and cook something together. We're doing virtual yoga classes. We're helping parents with kids come up with lessons plans that they can share throughout it. That the modern workplace is more than just the place you go and do your job. There's a cultural and a social aspect to that. And so I think one of the things that we're really trying to do is how do we keep that there? I think we're fortunate that we have a product that really solves a business need. I think we're incredibly fortunate that we're doing well financially, and that gives us the flexibility to not have to. I have friends who've had to fire half or more of their team in order to survive. We count ourselves incredibly lucky that we haven't had to make those hard decisions. But even then, keeping up morale and keeping up culture is a big piece of what Michelle and I think about on a daily basis.
We've spoken about how Cloudflare has become so integral to the infrastructure of the internet. And I know you have several initiatives that equip journalists and elections with free protection against cyber attacks. And also, most recently, you announced that you were doubling the size of your internship program when many other companies were canceling or cutting back. How do you evaluate your decisions for societal impact?
I wish I could tell you like it's a 6-point framework where we think about it. But I think it comes much more out of something that's kind of deep in your gut. When we launched something called Project Galileo, which is how do you protect politically or artistically important organizations that don't have the resources to pay for our services. And it was really born out of a mistake that we made. We have a pretty simple business model at some level where, small businesses pay us a little bit of money and they get small cyber attacks. Big businesses pay us millions of dollars and they get big cyber attacks, and it works out like that. But then every once in a while, there's sort of this group up here, which, it doesn't have a lot of money, but they get these giant cyber attacks. And by and large, it's a bunch of just sort of, garbage stuff that's like, random Chinese gambling sites or whatever that are on. And we had a policy of just sort of, if you were using a low-end version of our service and you got a giant cyber attack, we would kick you off. And I would get a report every day of all the people that we had kicked off the service the night before. And it was never very many, but one morning I was walking in and I was reading down the list, and there was one that just sort of caught my eye, and I was like, what is that? Looks familiar. And I tried to go to the website and you couldn't access it because it was being cyber attacked off the internet. And so I did just a quick, Wikipedia search, and I remember I was walking down the street, walking in the office, and my heart just sank because it was the largest independent news publication in Crimea, and it was right as the depending on your perspective, civil war or Russian invasion was happening, and they were literally covering it on the ground, and a large cyber attack that originated out of Russia took them offline, and they didn't have the resources they didn't have the time to even call us up and pay for it. And I felt like, wow, we were keeping them online, and we followed exactly what our playbook was and kicked them off. And that just felt horrible. And it was like, we've just made the world a worse place because, they're not able to cover what's going on the ground. And, we're a bunch of computer scientists. We're not really a bunch of political scientists. And so I think we had the knowledge that we were never going to be able to make the right decision in all of those cases. And so we said, okay, if we're trying to solve this problem, like don't ever do that dumb thing again, how can we do it? And we came to the conclusion that we should partner with a bunch of the civil society organizations that span the globe, span the politics, the political spectrum, and said, here's our deal. If any one of you recommends that something is politically or artistically important, and it's either a small commercial entity or a nonprofit organization, our promise is that if you vouch for them, we'll give them our full protection at no cost. And so I think that, again, we weren't evaluating it like, oh, if we do this, then people will write nice things about us in the newspaper, which will then cause, more customers to sign up and spend millions of dollars. It was nothing that calculated. It was simply, we screwed up, and how can we make it right and do that in the right way? I think with the internship program, I think because Michelle and I had lived through, 2008, 2009, we'd seen how painful, for ourselves and for our friends, having job offers and having internship offers pulled was, that was just, this sort of visceral punch in the gut. And so I remember calling, I called our CFO and I called Michelle and I said, I think we should double our internship program. And from a financial perspective, that was never the limiting factor. The limiting factor was, could we still have an internship program that we expected would largely be virtual and make sure that students had the same mentorship and sort of apprenticeship that they would traditionally, because we didn't want to, double it, but then make it, only 25% as good. Like that seemed like a deadweight loss. And so we had to spend a bunch of time with our product and engineering and other people that hired interns, making sure that they had the capacity. And we stretched as far as we thought we could reasonably go. And we announced it. We didn't know what to expect. And over the course, in the first couple of days, we were getting over 100 applicants an hour. We ended up with over 10,000 applicants. They're some of the most talented students we've ever seen. We're evaluating it now, but I felt almost awful that you saw some of just the most incredible engineers and developers and product managers that were early in their career and were having, from even really great companies, having their internships pulled away. And we're only going to be able to accommodate just a tiny fraction of even the highly qualified folks. So I've spent basically the last 3 weekends calling every fellow CEO and venture capitalist and investment banker I know, saying, guys, this is the most talented list of people I've ever seen. If you can lean in at all, you've got to. And so we're trying to then design, like, how can we refer students that we can't take to other companies that are still hiring? How can we then also if we can't do the sort of one-on-one mentorship, how can we create sort of a virtual mentorship program with senior leaders at CloudFlare and other technology companies where they can talk about how their career started and what they look like for in folks? And then, how can there's going to be a bunch of really great startups that start out of this time. And so we're looking into how can we provide for, the next year, a set of developer tools of kind of like the same developer pack that we would provide, Goldman Sachs or something else, but provide it to students at no cost. And if we can be part of the infrastructure that helps develop whatever the next great, technology company is, that'll be something that we're super proud of. So, and again, like, what's the framework for that? That's, we had this sort of visceral reaction. I was like, we're going to go do this. We kind of figured out how to do it. The reaction was so much bigger than we ever imagined. And now it's like, God, we're going to have at least 10,000 students that we're not going to be able to place. So how can we make sure that they've got, as many opportunities as they can? And
Fantastic.
And how can we, and then, if that's beneficial to our brand over the long term, that's great. But that was never the rationale for it.
Fantastic. I would love to speak to your team after this conversation about that. Actually, an engineer on our team created a website called startup hire.me. and it's looking to connect startups with people who have lost their internships, but also lost their jobs as well.
Yeah.
So a last question, I just want to take one from the audience. There's more of a pragmatic one. So as a founder, it's not easy to get in front of prospective customers, specifically if the product is designed to serve larger corporations. Do you have any advice for founder CEOs on how to approach big corporation C-level executives and start convincing them?
Yeah, so I mean, so that was not the approach we took. So the approach we took was, Lee and I had started this open source project, and we had a list of about 80,000 small businesses and individual developers, and that knew us through that. We'd built a reputation with them, and as a result, we could reach out to them and say, "Hey, we're starting this new thing. Want to give it a try?" And they, because we'd never asked them for anything over the years, they were very willing to try that. What we found was that when we would prove ourselves with that sort of developer and low-end audience, it allowed us to, we'd effectively get pulled up market over time. And so we had almost the opposite problem, which is, I remember the first time, in 2012, there was a big company that came to us and they said, "We've been watching what you guys do. We really love it. We want to sign $1 million contract with you," which would have almost doubled, our total revenue at that time with a single contract. And I remember Michelle said, "No, we're not going to do that." And like the whole team was like, "What are you doing? Like that would double our revenue." And she's like, "Listen, we're not ready." And so as a result, let's keep up the relationship with these folks, but it's going to take us probably 18 months to be ready to deliver that product. So I think that our approach has always been, provide kind of the service that we can. And then we got pulled into those conversations much earlier, frankly, than we deserved to. And the hard thing for us was actually saying no. And the reason why that was important was, if you have customers that are that dominant, then they end up defining your entire product roadmap, and it becomes really difficult to kind of do that. If you're gonna have $1 million customer, you want at least 2, because you want to have some gravitational pull against it. So I mean, I think it's really tough to if you were trying to sell to me, which is, I guess I'm a C-level person at this point. Emailing me, reaching out to me, I think it's a really, really, really difficult thing to do. And it's actually especially difficult right now, because just the email load from solicitations has gone up probably 5 to 10x in my inbox. And I'm just, even things that might be good ideas, I'm totally ignoring. I think that at the end of the day, sales is all about, again, having kind of empathy and curiosity. If you really do learn what someone's needs are, and you can understand those, and you can find a way to, empathetically get in front of them, which is not, don't spam 1 million people. Find the one perfect customer for who you are and say, "Listen, you're the perfect customer. I think you have this particular need. I'd love to get your feedback." And do that. I think that's going to be a better way of going about it. The old adage is, if you want advice, ask for money, and if you want money, ask for advice. I think the same thing is true at some level with large customers. That's definitely true, by the way, with VCs. Our trick with VCs was always just, "Hey, we're working on this thing. What would be your advice on doing this?" And no, we're not pitching you. And before long, people would fall in love with it. If you go to large customers, instead of thinking how to sell them, if you think about how can you listen to them and how can you learn from them, I think that's something which is more powerful. And for anyone who's still a student, I mean, there's no more powerful asset you have than your .edu email address. To this day, I mean, part of the reason I'm doing this right now is because Pear has sort of been an early stage focused company and taking care of a lot of students over the years. I think that writing to someone saying, "Hey, I'm a student. I'm working on a new problem," and those are basically the only emails from strangers that I answer these days. And I think you'll find that across other companies as well.
You might receive quite a few of those emails after this talk now that you've given that away.
We'll see. We'll see. I control no budget, so I am the worst person in the organization to try and pitch your idea to. But you know, here we are. So if you can solve one of the real problems that we have, we're always looking for great solutions.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today. I was really delighted to speak to you. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has as well. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ian. I appreciate you having me on. Take care. Stay safe. Wash your hands.